The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown yard as James slowly walked up the crumbling concrete path. The old Victorian house loomed tall and dark before him, the peeling paint and broken windows making it look abandoned and sinister. Yet this was the place he had grown up, the home where he had spent countless happy childhood summers playing and exploring. Now, as he stood before it, suitcase in hand, those happy memories seemed distant. A chill wind whistled through the eaves and bare tree branches, carrying the sound of creaking wood. His footsteps echoed on the warped boards of the porch as he made his way to the front door. Inside waited family that he hadn't seen in years, relatives he barely knew anymore. What memories would this visit stir? What echoes of the past? The key turned stiffly in the lock. The door slowly opened, and with hesitant steps he entered the gloomy house. Jessica was thrilled to finally move into her first house after years of saving her earnings as a nurse at the local hospital. While the exterior needed some work, the interior had been recently renovated, and Jessica looked forward to making the space her own. At 32, Jessica enjoyed her solitary life and the quiet the house provided, a welcome change from the bustle of her nursing duties. Her old tabby cat, Mitzi, seemed to enjoy it too, immediately curling up on a sunny patch of carpet in the living room. On her days off, Jessica enjoyed reading and tending to her garden. She led a simple but content life. Her selfless devotion to her patients gave her work meaning. Her tranquil home life grounded her. Still, something seemed off in the new house, almost imperceptible. Mitzi gazed up warily at unseen corners. Creaks sounded from vacant rooms. Shadows passed where no one stood. Jessica dismissed these as noises of an old house adjusting. But an unshakable feeling of not being alone lingered. The night was still, with only the occasional hoot of an owl or skittering of a squirrel in the brush. Jenny pulled her sweater tighter against the autumn chill as she walked home alone from her waitressing job. She quickened her pace as the gravel road narrowed into the forest, flanked on both sides by looming pines that blotted out the moonlight. A snap of a twig stopped Jenny in her tracks. She peered into the thick wood, searching for the source of the noise. An eerie silence followed. The wind picked up, whistling through the needled branches. Somewhere in the distance, a mournful wolf howl echoed through the darkness. Jenny's pulse quickened. She scolded herself for being silly, for letting her imagination run wild. More likely it was just a deer or a raccoon. As Jenny continued on, she couldn't shake the prickling feeling on the back of her neck, like unseen eyes tracking her movement. She admonished herself again. It was all in her head, right? She picked up her pace again, ignoring the creeping dread that slithered up her spine. Just a little further until she reached the clearing. A shape flickered at the edge of the tree line. Jenny froze, squinting into the gloom. A hulking silhouette lingered between the trunks before melting back into the shadows. Jenny's heart hammered against her ribs. She broke into a run, her breaths ragged, brambles clawing at her bare legs. Almost there. The woods thinned ahead. Relief washed over her as Jenny burst from the tree line. Just off the road sat her little cottage, windows aglow with warm light. Jenny hurried up the steps of the porch, the creak of the boards loud in the stillness. As she reached for the doorknob, the motion sensor light clicked on, illuminating the yard in harsh fluorescent. And there, lurking at the forest edge, two glinting eyes peered out from the darkness, watching, waiting. The air grew heavy as Susan walked down the long, dark hallway. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following close behind. The floorboards creaked under her feet, even though she tread lightly. Susan's heart pounded. She picked up her pace. A loud bang came from the room up ahead. Susan jumped. Had someone broken in? Gripped with fear, she considered turning back. But she had to keep going. As Susan drew closer, she noticed the door to the room was slightly ajar. Strange whispers drifted out. A cold breeze hit Susan's face, even though the house had no drafts or open windows. The whispers grew louder. Shadows danced under the door. Susan's mouth went dry. Someone, something, was in that room. Every nerve ending told her to run, but she had to know what was on the other side. She reached out a trembling hand to push the door open. The air grew still. Susan held her breath, trying to hear past the thudding of her heart. A metallic scraping sound echoed down the dark hallway, barely audible over her ragged breathing. Could it be, the thing that slaughtered all those people? Susan felt the urge to run, but her legs were frozen in terror. She spotted a flicker of movement at the end of the hallway. A misshapen silhouette lumbered into view, dragging something thick and heavy behind it. The smell hit Susan first, foul and sickly sweet, the unmistakable stench of decaying flesh. As the shape shambled closer, Susan could make out blood-slicked limbs, ragged clothing. And was that a human arm dangling from its jaws? Susan's mind reeled, unable to accept the nightmarish sight bearing down on her. She opened her mouth to scream, but only a strangled gasp escaped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from this monster. She could only watch helplessly as it shambled closer, growling with predatory hunger. Death's cold hand was reaching for her, and she was powerless to stop it. This was the thing that massacred all those people, and she was next. Jill stepped out of the abandoned house and took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. She had made it through that terrifying ordeal alive. The ghostly apparitions and menacing shadows that had pursued her through the decrepit halls were gone. For now, at least, she was safe. Jill walked briskly down the overgrown path leading away from the house, the full moon illuminating her way. The shrieks and moans that had echoed from within those walls had fallen silent. Though her heart still pounded, the night around her was calm. As Jill reached the dirt road where she'd left her car, her breathing finally steadied. She was unharmed, and the nightmarish manifestations seemed confined to the house. The overhead branches swayed gently in the breeze, showing no signs of the supernatural. For the first time in hours, Jill felt the comfort of normalcy. With shaking hands, she reached into her pocket for her car keys, ready to leave this awful place behind. As she grasped the familiar metal keyring, she let out a sigh of relief. She was safe now. The horror was over. Little did she know, the true terror had yet to reveal itself. This was just a false sense of security. Sarah's heart pounded as she peered into the darkness of the abandoned house. She had entered cautiously, searching for her missing friend, but found only silence. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through boarded windows, the shadows seemed to shift and contort. Sarah shook off the uneasy feeling and continued down the hall. A sudden crash from upstairs made Sarah freeze. She stared up at the ceiling, listening intently. Had she imagined it? No, there it was again. A heavy thud overhead. Sarah's mouth went dry and her legs trembled. Whatever was up there, she had to get out. Now. She turned and rushed for the front door. Just as she reached for the handle, an unearthly shriek filled the air. Sarah whipped around to see a misshapen creature barreling down the stairs on all fours. It was impossibly fast, its limbs bending at unnatural angles as it bounded toward her. Sarah screamed and threw her weight against the stubborn door. The monster was nearly upon her when the door burst open. Sarah fell through just as razor-sharp claws swiped the air where her head had been. She tumbled to the ground, dazed but desperate to escape. The creature's enraged roars followed her as she staggered to her feet. Her heart dropping, Sarah realized she didn't recognize her surroundings. The house was nowhere in sight. The creature had her trapped and alone out here, and it was still coming for her. After endless days of being tormented by the sinister presence, Emma could no longer bear the oppressive dread that permeated the old Victorian house. She decided to confront the evil that lurked within those walls once and for all. As night fell, an unnatural chill permeated the air. Emma steeled her nerves and ventured into the lightless attic, where she had felt the ominous presence the strongest. At first she saw nothing but shadows dancing in the corners. Then suddenly an icy wind swirled around her feet and she heard a bone-chilling laugh echo through the room. Before her eyes materialized a shadowy specter, its eyes burning red, leering at her maliciously. Emma stood paralyzed in fear as the wraith rushed towards her. At the last moment she found her courage and cried out, "Begone, foul demon! You have no power over me or this house." To her surprise, the specter recoiled, writhing in agony at her words. Seizing the chance, Emma began chanting every prayer and incantation she could remember. The specter wailed and contorted, shrinking smaller and smaller until it faded away completely with an unearthly shriek. As the last traces of the evil spirit vanished, sunlight began streaming through the attic windows. The heavy pall that had hung over the house was lifted at last. Emma had freed the house, and herself, from the nefarious presence. She emerged from the attic feeling emboldened and finally at peace in her new home. After the horrific events of that fateful night, Susan found herself changed in ways she could never have imagined. The carefree girl who loved to laugh was now plagued by paranoia and fear. She jumped at every creak and thud, certain that the evil was still lurking nearby. Susan struggled to return to her normal routine. Sleep was infrequent as visions of fanged teeth and bloodshot eyes invaded her dreams. Her appetite was non-existent, no matter how much her mother pleaded with her to eat. Even being around friends brought little comfort anymore. Susan now saw threat and danger lurking in every shadow. The only solace she found was in writing. She poured her trauma into a private journal, documenting every detail to exorcise the demons from her mind. As the pages filled, Susan began to find a sense of control and empowerment. She realized the evil had not destroyed her but unleashed an inner strength she never knew she possessed. Susan vowed to never allow herself to be a victim again. She took back her life and found joy in simple moments once more. But deep down, Susan knew this was only the beginning. The evil had not been fully vanquished that night. It lurked, waiting to strike again. She would be ready this time. Susan closed her journal and headed out into the night with newfound purpose. The reckoning would come, end with a final terrifying or ominous moment to haunt the reader. The protagonist wakes up in a cold sweat, grasping for breath. Was it all just a nightmare? They examine their trembling hands and notice a slimy, dark residue under their fingernails. The ghostly face that haunted their dreams still lingers at the edge of consciousness. A shiver runs down their spine as an unnatural breeze blows through the room. The protagonist's eyes dart around the darkness, certain something sinister lurks just out of sight. Then comes the faint sound of disembodied laughter as the last candle flickers out, plunging the room into complete darkness.